Hello and welcome to another episode of Daddy Issues. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Craig Jakes.
Hi, and I'm Don Tretler.
I'm Chad Simmons.
He's our guest today. And we decided Chad was available today, so we thought we would use him as our guest today. He's works for Greater Falls Connections, and he does presentations on a number of different subjects.
And I mean, we had one thought about what we were going to talk about today, but we're just going to kind of free flow. He came in with some ideas.
And then I totally flummoxed that idea. So
it's perfectly fine. There's plenty of things we could talk about.
Yeah, it's actually
He is our first non-parent guest.
so I'm going to get a lot of gripe for that, I imagine, over the next hour. So be ready.
But
So I can talk a little bit about what I do with Greater Falls Connections, and maybe that'll segue well into what we can talk about today.
Good deal.
A variety of things. So I'm the media coordinator for Greater Falls Connections. We do drug and alcohol prevention as well as community organizing and making connections within the community to strengthen and create a vibrant, thriving Greater Falls community. So, and I think we'll talk a little bit about it later. Some things that we do are community events like Parkapalooza, which was our third Parkapalooza, community block party this year.
And Don and I were both there just over the weekend helping out.
Yeah. And so actually, why don't we talk a little bit about that, since it's something that we
when I showed
I have
up,
a remnant from it. This is a temporary tattoo
viewers at home can see
that the kids could have gotten. We had a table of some young ladies were putting on temporary tattoos, and I got one, and it's still, today's what, Thursday?
Yeah.
So 5 days later, it's still relatively
really
visible.
I was thinking that.
Yeah. Well, I like the tattoo enough that I felt like, I could sacrifice showering.
Yeah, you have one of those plastic armbands that goes over.
That's it.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly it.
But I work nights, so I actually got there as it was really getting going because I couldn't help set up at 10 when I got home at 7:30.
Right.
So I got there and Don was already on the grill. There was a couple other people, or he was throwing burgers and buns and stuff for everybody. There was some kids working the grill.
Yeah.
And, we had a water balloon fight.
Yep.
We had the fire department came by and they opened up the fire hydrant.
Which, it was amazing. I've seen some of the pictures.
Yeah. There was a potato sack race. There was a bunch of stuff. Free hot dogs and burgers for the kids. And
the point of the day was to really kind of bring all segments of the community together, have fun, and as you were saying, the kids lead the effort. So parents and kids kind of work together to kind of create some of the activities and the fun events. Kids were on the grill all day. Teens were working the grill. So the idea is to really build connection within the community, and these types of things are what lead to strong community and preventing substance use and other risky behavior.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is when I describe it to people when they ask, when I say what we're setting up for Parkapalooza, this is the second year I've been involved with helping come up with some ideas, and Don was there too. I wasn't around for the first one, but I always tell them it's a way for parents to come with their kids and have something for the kids to do that they won't be getting into trouble, because there's plenty of things that the kids can get into trouble in this area with, and this is something positive where there's not a worry of they're going to do something destructive or whatever.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot. I mean, a lot of community members are telling us that, hey, there's not a lot for kids to do. A lot of kids are telling us there's not a lot to do. And I think that's a struggle, because I think, and I don't know what your experience was like growing up, but for me, I oftentimes felt as a kid there wasn't a lot to do either. And I think so there's an element of that's just a part of being, of growing up. You're bored and, you don't know what else to do, so you need to get creative and
I remember
play.
when I was a teenager, we used to go to the beach. I went to high school in Rhode Island, so we used to go to the beach all the time. So we used to go to the beach all the time, our friends, and we'd hang out, and the police would always chase us off the beach.
Yeah.
Not that we were doing anything, but basically the police didn't want us on the beach.
Right.
And we always felt like, well, what do you want us to do? Where are we as teens
That's a great question.
supposed to go? What are we
Yeah.
supposed to do? And if the school, during the school year, if the school didn't put something on, if the school didn't have, say, dances
Yeah.
or recreation leagues, things like that, which a lot of times didn't extend into the summer,
Right.
we had nowhere to go. We really didn't have any place where teens could kind of hang out outside of, hanging around with our parents and things like that. So
Right.
the beach seemed like a natural progression. You didn't have to pay any money, it didn't cost us anything. And
Well, see, my experience was a little different. My dad had the attitude of, if you're bored, it's because you're boring. You should be able to find something to do. And summer
put it all on
vacations,
you, huh?
it's like, you're done with breakfast. It's not raining. Go outside.
Yeah.
We'll see you at lunch. And then you're going back outside, and we'll see you when it's dusk.
So they really.
But they
played
lived
for-
right
yeah.
next to woods, and my brothers and I used to go
Yeah.
out in the woods and just wander around, smashing sticks and just whatever, we never really felt that bored.
Yeah.
We'd have fun sitting there smashing rocks apart with other rocks to see what kind of cool stuff was
Right.
inside,
And
because
this
sometimes it'd be sparkly gem-looking stones, and
Yeah. So you were just exploring, you were playing, and I think that's oftentimes a lot of what we come back to is that especially as young kids, we're not given the opportunity or we're not encouraged enough to really just go and explore and play.
But there's a lot of fear for that now
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
because you worry about, people getting picked up in vans, and, you worry about your kids, sending them out for the day and saying, I'll see you at dusk, just doesn't sound as safe as,
Yeah.
this was the early 80s and to the mid 80s that was happening with me, and they didn't think that much of it, but,
Right.
it only takes, so many, news articles or whatever.
now, do you think it's really less safe now, or do you think it just seems less safe because there's a lot more media and there's a lot more awareness about every time a kid is picked up?
I think that's probably more it, is that we just hear about it more. I think that, it probably doesn't happen any more often. I think that it spreads with Twitter and Facebook, and, it doesn't take long for these stories to get out. I mean, it gets out before the news gets a hold of it.
So it's interesting. Just this morning, actually, the chief operating officer of Facebook apologized to users because they did a study without users' consent, seeing if people that saw negative posted negative things themselves, and found there was a direct correlation between that. And I think this speaks to the influence of media, especially on young kids, and kind of creating this sense of fear, and how the media, especially social media now, kind of controls what we're expected to think, what we consume, and what we do and how we act. And I think that's the fear factor, and how that influences kids' play and the ability to grow, especially as into young adults. I think that's really a lot of that's a portion of what I do in my role as the media coordinator with Greater Falls Connections, is to really kind of talk about and dissect the media that we see. And I think the fear part is really, really important, because I think, when we were kids, we didn't have all of this hype and all of this fear kind of bombarding us in every single way.
Yeah, when I was a kid was when it really started to hit that rumor about people putting stuff in Halloween candy, and that was about the extent of it. And we do a game every so often, actually pretty often on this show, where I go to Snopes, do some research on one topic, and then quiz him on, this rumor, is it true or false?
Yeah.
He actually did one for me last episode.
Okay.
We don't have one prepared this time, but we do it every few
that's a great
episodes
idea.
anyway. And back when we did this as a podcast, we talked about Halloween rumors, and that turned out to be absolutely false. Nothing of the sort has ever been reported to have ever happened.
Really?
But everybody's heard that story.
Right. Yeah.
So Chad, do you feel like the media is kind of amping up fear?
Well, so a part of what I do is we talk with kids, with teens, middle school, high school, and I actually we're a firm advocate for working with young kids, even toddlers around media. And the idea is to really empower everyone to be critical about what we see and what we hear in the media, and to really kind of inspire us to essentially kind of create our own media. And we have that ability now. So we do it with Greater Falls Connections, do that in kind of the frame around substances. What are we seeing? What are we experiencing when we see tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs advertised to us? An example is this. We work really closely with and collaborate with the Boys and Girls Club. Mm-hmm. And a couple of weeks ago, we did kind of like a Q&A with the kids to see what they remember around alcohol and tobacco advertisements. And we had some 8, 9, 10-year-olds repeat verbatim the most interesting man on earth ads from
Stay thirsty, my friend.
Heard him do an interview. He's actually a dullard. He is the most boring interview I had ever heard.
He actually lives in Vermont, I believe.
But
it was interesting. It's Dos Equis, right? Is the label.
Yes.
And so these kids were able to repeat verbatim, even though they're not even close. They're not even half the age to be able to drink. They're able to repeat the messages that are being shared and repeated over TV and internet.
Well, I remember years ago when Joe Camel was still the advertising gimmick for Camel cigarettes. Mm-hmm. They said that he was right up there with Santa Claus and Mickey Mouse as being that recognizable to children,
yep.
More so to certain age children than Mickey Mouse.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of a scary thought when you don't want kids knowing Joe Camel more than Mickey Mouse.
Right, and that's in those days too. Although sadly we're seeing it kind of be repeated over and over again, but the tobacco industry really was kind of on the cutting edge of using really sophisticated marketing and the science actually of advertising and marketing to get kids to smoke and get kids to buy things by nagging, get kids to nag their parents in order to buy things. Those were things that took years of research and science to do. So our role with Greater Falls Connections and some of the work that we do is to really work with families and parents to kind of help their kids kind of see and understand what they're experiencing, what they're seeing through social media and traditional media, as well as kids and helping them deconstruct the media that they do. So there's lots of great resources, but a couple of stats is in the last 2 years, children's access to mobile media, so smartphones and tablets, has dramatically increased, and almost twice as many children have used mobile media compared to just 2 years ago. And television still dominates, so kids are still kind of getting most of their media through television, but it's the gap is closed quite a bit between mobile devices and TV.
Well, I don't think it was on the show, but I had mentioned to Don before a situation that I had to deal with my son when my oldest was, probably 3. But maybe I'll see what you think I should have done. What if you're watching the news, it's late at night, and your child who's around 3 happens to walk in the room quietly and hears a horrific news story?
Yeah.
It's not that they're trying to fearmonger necessarily, they're just reporting on something that happened.
Yeah.
But then your kid's now exposed to this, sometimes graphically violent news story.
Yeah.
I believe it was the Scott Peterson case that my son walked in hearing about.
Okay.
And, he went fishing on Christmas Eve and his wife turned up missing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I turned because I heard a noise, and there's my then 3-year-old, 2 or 3, something like that.
It's pretty young.
And he's like upset visibly, and I said, "Oh, what's the matter, bud? And he said, "Dad, are you gonna kill mommy?"
Oh,
I'm like, "Oh, buddy, that's kind of up to her." But anyway.
All kidding aside.
No, but I mean,
no, that's
how do you handle something like that?
So,
I know that's not exactly what you were talking about with the media stuff, but
it's
I mean,
great example because the concept of media literacy is to take those moments, those teachable moments, and to have those conversations, especially very early. 2 or 3 is not not too early to have those conversations. So kind of in the moment, talk about what they're experiencing. We also encourage parents to not be afraid of having the conversations and not try to protect or hide your kids from these things. They are going to see this, especially now. They're going to have access. Kids today
or
have
hear about it
access.
from other students in their class that
or
had seen it.
Yeah, so
you know?
hearing about it is one thing, but having a kid then kind of pull up the YouTube video and watching it right then and there is a totally different thing. So as a parent, what we can do is have the conversations. Sit your son down and say, what were you thinking, or what were you experiencing when you saw that, and talk about some of the fear and talk a little bit about what they felt, and then kind of help them understand that what they saw sometimes happens in the world, and that you're there to protect them and to kind of be a guide.
I've always been more open with my kids when it came to if they asked any questions about drugs or sex. I have never I figure if they're old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to hear the answer. I will tailor it to their age if they're on the younger side of things. Great. But I've never, it's like, as far as my kids knew growing up, saying that, the word penis was the correct word.
Did he just say that on television?
Yes. Anyway, I know you have sensitive ears. And he loves to see if he can throw me off.
Chase your children away from the televisions.
Right now.
Craig just said the P word.
Poop?
Piano.
I made him up. Anyway, the point is, I raised them where I didn't use dumbed down words for that. When they were old enough to ask, "What's this?" It's like, "Oh, that's your penis."
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And to them, it was the same thing as, that's my nose or that's my ear. Like they didn't think anything of it. The embarrassing part came when he then questioned about girls, and I said, "Well, they have a vagina. It's different, but it's also used for going to the bathroom." And he's like, "Oh, okay." A couple weeks later, I'm at a friend's house.
Right.
My friend and his fiance at the time had a female roommate. She was watching him, sitting on the couch watching the movie Garfield, which not a good movie, but not really the point of this conversation. I'm outside having a cigar, smoking with my buddy, and she comes to the door, bright red, about as red as on your shirt. And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Well, he asked me a question and I don't know how to answer it." And I said, "What did he ask you?" He asked if I had a gina to pee out of. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, do you?
So I opened the door, looked past her, and I said, "Yes, she does, but she's an adult and doesn't want to talk about it with a kid." "Oh, okay." And he went back to watching Garfield.
Right.
But as far as, when it came to violence on the news or something, I guess I've not been as open to that subject as much as I have been to, sexuality or to,
and those are tricky
use.
Conversations. And I think interesting, and I'd love to hear kind of like what your experience has been kind of talking with your son about some of those, they see, the images they see, especially the images. But I think what you brought up is a really interesting point, is having conversations with other parents and kind of seeing what other parents are doing and learning from their experiences. In terms of media and understanding the media, I think we can all be experiential learners in the sense that we've all had experiences, and so we can kind of learn from one another to see what works and what doesn't. And not everything's going to work. What may work for you might not work for another family or another parent. But yeah, what's been your experience in terms of kind of how to have some of those conversations?
Well, it gets a little difficult because sometimes where I'm running into struggles are where the values for our mainstream media kind of conflict with being a parent. And
that's a really great point.
I think a lot of people misinterpret where, in the country we have a freedom of speech, which was designed basically to be able to talk about our political views and be able to, voice our dissatisfaction with our government. And people have extended that into, we have the freedom of speech to say whatever we feel like whenever we feel like saying it. And I've run into struggles, just to give kind of an example, where Top 40 Radio And my son is really, he's really been enjoying the Top 40 radio, which if we look at some of the music that comes out, I've had to describe a lot of, to try to explain what these people are talking about. There are a lot of songs about, partying and waking up with a hangover, waking up with somebody whose name you don't know, things like that.
Yeah.
There's the song, what does it, Talk Dirty to Me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because your booty don't need explaining.
Remember, the classic songs where they had to be subtle about what they were saying? Afternoon Delight. They didn't come right out and say it. The adults understood what they were saying.
Beach Boys,
But now they're, it's like, turn around and shake that thing. It's like, whoa, wait, we're on a new level.
Yeah, and as you were saying, that's top 40. So
that's not even the parental advisory.
Those are repeated over and over again. And I think you bring up that's a really great point about the values as, the kind of the media and corporately controlled media conflicting with raising a child. Right. And how that, where is that imbalance, and how can we, how can we address that? Some of the resources, if you go to our website, greaterfallsconnections.org, we have a section on media literacy, specifically for teens, and then we're kind of constantly improving that section for parents. But there's a really good website called commonsensemedia.org. So it's commonsensemedia.org. And that allows you as a parent to kind of look at some of the upcoming movies, the music, and other things going on in the media, and they actually help rate what what level they're at for parents. So say, hey, this movie's coming up this weekend, we'd love to go see it. Is this going to be okay for my 10-year-old son? And then see some of the comments around that. So those are really important. But you and I kind of had some conversation around hip hop music. So we both grew up listening to hip hop music.
Absolutely.
And my dad
perform it.
Yeah, well, exactly. And
check out my music video on this station at midnight because they can't play it earlier, even edited.
So, and I think we should, these are the kind of conversations, because your music's really, really good, but it's also
not for children.
Yeah, it's pretty hard, hard hitting. And I remember having conversations with my dad when I was, 6th, 7th grade around the appropriateness and around the music I was listening to. I was listening to Public Enemy. And then I started, in the later 90s, I was listening to Tupac. And so he was really on my case. I listened to
both myself.
And so what were those artists saying at those times, and how was I as a teen kind of taking those messages in? So I think those are really important conversations. They're also tricky for parents.
I've always been open as far as music with my kids. I mean, I wouldn't listen to Two Live Crew unedited around my kids because, it's very sexually explicit.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, here's the funny thing. I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh at lunch and then finish off, the day by listening to Public Enemy. So politically we didn't agree, but I loved their music.
Yeah.
I loved Chuck D's voice. I mean, I may not have had the same opinions on some of the subjects as him, but that didn't mean I couldn't appreciate the art behind it.
Right.
And, so when it comes to my kids, I'll break down songs, what they're actually saying, and I'll tell them, because I know a lot of music trivia. It's my forte. I love music. And they know so much about music, and my stepkids do too, because I'll pause and go, what they're saying here is this, and what they're talking about is, this is a reference to this. They have a lot of musical knowledge. I think Austin was complimented in a report card about how much knowledge he had about music in his music class, and my girlfriend said, yeah, that's definitely from Craig.
So what you're doing is one of the kind of primary principles of media literacy.
I don't just do the edited versions around them, because I also explain to them adults can use language that kids shouldn't, and my kids would give me a hard time for swearing.
So that goes back to something that Don was saying about kind of the responsibility in terms of we have the ability to say what we want and think in this country. We're very fortunate. But what's been oftentimes left out of that equation is the responsibility that comes along with that. And so having those conversations like you've been having are really good because you're exposing your kids to what's out there, but you're also providing some context, and you're also providing some direction in terms of how they can respond and use or not use those words. And the concept that you're really addressing is one of the primary principles of media literacy is understanding the context and the subcontext. What do the words actually say? So the actual words that we're hearing are the images. And what is actually the subcontext? What's not being spoken or not being seen, but it's being implied? And I think those are really great concepts for our kids to learn at a very early age, especially if, as we've learned from some of the middle school students in the community, they're being exposed to media at a very, very early age. We talked to some middle school students who had 600 Instagram friends, and by the age of 12. So obviously a 12-year-old's not going to have 600 people in their life that they actually, physically know. But so how did they kind of work through having that kind of exposure to different images and different kind of perspectives at such an early age?
Right.
Yeah. So
Now,
these are great conversations.
To be fair,
Yeah.
I also don't have a problem with parents who are like, well, I wouldn't let my kids hear this language. I understand that, and I think that's a personal thing. My thought behind it, I guess, is they hear it, they know what it is, they know what I expect from them as far as what their language can be, and if you play the edited versions of a lot of stuff, it's just backmasked, and they can figure out what was said. You know, if it says bull and then there's some weird sound of a word backwards, they know what it is.
Right.
Because in the real world, people aren't necessarily editing their language.
Yeah.
But I get more into actually breaking down lyrics that aren't explicit and explaining it too. Which goes to the type of stuff he's saying where this top 40 songs where it's talking about something and they might not be swearing while they say it because it's on the radio, but maybe what they're talking about is more harmful for the way you want to raise your kids than if someone dropped the F-bomb.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like we've had a kind of a cultural shift where as a culture, we're not quite as concerned about the impression that we're making on young people anymore. And as an example, as we're talking about media, I know that for a section of time when I was a young kid, alcohol, like hard liquor, was advertised on television. I remember specifically the one that comes to mind is Martini and Rossi. We used to have a little jingle that said, say yes to Martini and Rossi on the rocks.
And you can remember
yes.
that. Yeah.
Right? Now, this was in the 70s. So for a long time, I know it was at least 10 years, they had stopped hard liquor advertisements on television. And I don't know how long because things creep in. So it wasn't necessarily, there was a big announcement that from now on, we're going to let hard liquor get advertised on television again, but it is. So now we're back again. We're starting to have hard liquor in addition to the beer commercials, which, are trying to influence kids that, hey, I'll give you an example. This is just one. I won't even say what the brand is, okay? Yeah. But there was a guy that showed up to a party, and he had a thing of beer, and he had a big sandwich, and he was kind of struggling with the packages. And one of his friends came to the party behind him and said, well, here, let me carry that for you. And he carried the beer. And when he walked into the party, everybody was like, yeah, thanks, man. And then the other guy said, but I got a sandwich, and nobody was interested in the sandwich. Though the same guy brought both of these.
Both of them, yeah. And that actually, it'd be great to get your perspectives on this, be the Daddy Issues Show, is kind of what we're told through the media, through, again, those kind of very narrow values that were provided through corporate media around maleness and gender through the media, and kind of the idea of what it is to be a boy or what it is to be a man in the media and how that influences. So in that particular instance, and the tobacco and alcohol industries have done such a great job at kind of pigeonholing men as being strong, popular, and able to kind of handle any situation
Unless they're a father, then they're blithering idiots. We've had that discussion too.
Yes.
For some reason, if the man is being responsible and taking care of a child, whether married or solo, he's a blithering idiot that's pouring, the example I gave is the dad that's pouring waffle mix into a toaster.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on.
Yep.
Nobody is that dumb.
Right.
So when it comes to a actual positive thing for a man to try to achieve, being a good father and a good role model to their kids, then they're made to look like idiots.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it's like, oh, he's the football star, or he's the popular kid. And it seems kind of ironic that as soon as he has a kid, he's got to be an idiot.
Yeah, there is. I just have it. There's.
We had to go back to the 80s to find a positive father role model, maybe the early 90s.
What we're thinking, if you go back, we're thinking about, Bill Cosby, when he had his show, was a positive father role model. I don't really watch much television,
Full
House,
so it's hard
maybe.
to. Full House had good dad role models.
Yeah.
But then we've got the counter. We were just talking before the show about Homer Simpson.
Right.
So Homer Simpson, there's
Yeah.
one of the guys that comes to mind, Peter Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'm talking about animation because I can't really think about other dads. The two dads from 2.5 Men.
Yeah.
A show that I absolutely hate, so I watched very little of it.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what kind of role models those two guys were, but I can see from the media about Charlie Sheen. I'm sure he wasn't a positive role model in the show.
Well, yeah.
Ironically, he slept around a lot and got drunk every day. And his name was Charlie.
What about
Subtle?
the other guy? Was he a positive role model?
I actually didn't watch that show either, to be quite honest.
So we don't even have an opinion because
Yeah.
we can't even.
He was a divorced, whipped father who, had to live with his brother because he was always broke, and he was definitely not made to be. He was the one that was a dad, and he was not shown in a good light. Very, somewhat effeminate. Just anything to take away from him, being a responsible father.
So being a
taking care of
dad
his-
makes you less manly. There's a generalization right there, based
Right.
on our media.
And
No,
it's,
and
it's
actually,
ridiculous.
There's one of the resources again that we have is called the Media Literacy Project, and they do great educational materials both for youth and adults and parents. And one of the things that they have is it's called Gender, Race, and Sexuality: How Media Shapes Our Culture. And so they look at this very particular issue that men, what we're told in the media, especially through characters in TV shows and movies, are men kind of dominate the work life. Like that's their domain. And so this is what we're told from a very early age. And the home life, they're kind of blithering idiots. And they have no opinion, they have no emotions, or if they do have an emotion, they need to hold it in. And so you then kind of map that out and extrapolate like what that means to when do they do show emotion? When they're consuming substances. They're drinking, usually, is kind of an opportunity where they let loose or kind of open up about how they feel.
That goes back to All in the Family. I remember an episode where he actually opened up and told Meathead, his son-in-law, that he actually really loved him and respected him. He was drunk beyond, and that was in the 70s,
Right,
you know?
right.
And I mean, that was the only way he could open up and say, I know I give you a hard time all the time, but you got to go to college. I had to support my family, and the alcohol brought all that out, and there was tears and whatnot, and it was really touching. Except, why did it take the alcohol to do it?
To do that, yeah, because again, we're kind of told from an early age that
And talk about the
men aren't
epitome
supposed
of
to be emotional.
ignorant fathers.
Yeah. So, and again, all of these things kind of overlap. And what we look at in terms of how this relates to substance use and abuse is how are those values. I really like that you put it that way, because I think that's really what it boils down to, is the corporately controlled values that we're fed. How do those influences the things that we do and the things that we consume? And we were talking about this before the show started around prescription drugs. And I was sharing how, wow, my childhood probably would have been a lot different had I not grown up in the 80s. And I would be growing up today. I was a really rambunctious kid. I got in trouble a lot. I talked a lot. But would I have been diagnosed if I grew up today with, ADHD
right,
and prescribed something at a very early age? I don't know, but chances are likely yes. So, and we're often told that, well, if you have this problem, we've got a solution. And we've been holding these public forums over the last couple of months around opioids and prescription drugs. And one of the physicians who works here at the Rockingham Medical Center through Springfield Hospital talks a lot about the corporately controlled prescription drug industry. Says, you all have problems. We have the solution with prescription drugs. So again, the values,
and our solutions have side effects, but we have solutions to those.
To those too. So we'll just kind of keep feeding them and feeding them. So
that's...
all of these things kind of overlap. In our role in kind of doing community organizing work is to really kind of break out what we're being fed, to dissect it, understand it, and then the goal is to empower our kids and ourselves to create something else that we can put out there and be happy about.
And it's weird. It seems like no matter where you go, someone's got a point of view they're trying to push with these things in the media, And it can be, they might even have a positive reason for doing it.
Yeah.
But, it's like we were talking about that YouTube video that's out now about asking adults and kids what does it mean to run like a girl, and it's talking about how degrading that is to girls, and the younger kids just ran like they normally would because it didn't cross their minds to think that a girl would be running differently than a boy, which very good message. But then there's people that, and this is an issue that I've seen a lot, is when people say, well, everyone's equal and they're exactly the same. I agree that everyone's equal. The problem is, biologically, men and women do tend towards certain things that are separate and are better at certain things than each other. And I'm not saying that there aren't really brilliant mathematician women. The girl from the Wonder Years that played Winnie Cooper
that's true.
Is a genius mathematician.
She is.
But there are certain things, like in a home life, that women are better at and men are better at. There's a reason why there's both that are supposed to be available to raise a kid, because the kid needs both of those things.
Right. Good point. And that's, and I'm stopping you only just so that we can highlight that, okay? That moms and dads, okay, as parents, are good at separate things. That together as a team is the ideal situation.
Absolutely.
That they both are able to put stuff into the pot. They're both able to add stuff for a kid's development. So I only want to stop, highlight, if you're watching the television show, remember that.
Yeah. I would. I might have a slightly different opinion. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, and that's not to say that a woman can't be the disciplinarian at times. That's not to say a man can't show emotion and be there to comfort a child. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that there's a predisposition towards one of those for each. We're learning to both be able to work on those things, but in general, we're just, it's inherent in us to take certain roles in the parenting, and that's why together is the best way. The quote that I bring up every time is when Chris Rock says, there's plenty of women that say, I raised my kids by myself and I did a good job. He's like, just because it can be done doesn't mean it's the way to do it. It's like the best way is to have both parents there and engaged and involved. And if they have to take, different roles to get everything covered, fine.
Yeah. And the numbers are starting to switch where the roles, more men are taking the role of stay-at-home dad or primary caretaker for the children, as more women are taking a greater role in the workforce. So it's not a huge number. We're not at 50-50 or anywhere near kind of a 50-50, but if you look over the course of the last 20 years, more fathers, and the number is increasing, and I think that trend is going to continue, that more dads are going to become that primary caretaker, where we're also dependent on to be the nurturers.
But you don't hear about that enough. What you hear about is the deadbeat dads that don't take care of their kids. And it's like, again, you and I have both been through divorces, and I can't see anyone convincing you not to be there for your son. I cannot imagine any way that someone was going to keep you from being there for your child.
There was a television show, and I don't know if it's still on TV. You may have a better awareness. It was on, it was about dads, and about dads being the primary caretakers. And it was a positive show about it. It wasn't a mocking show where they were trying to make the men out to be fools, but the men.
Was it drama, comedy?
This was a reality television show.
It's a reality.
Like the Teen Mom Show.
Okay.
I don't think it was MTV. I almost want to say it was on A&E, Learning Channel, one of those two.
Okay. No, I'm not familiar with it, but that's great to.
And it had gotten some publicity. I had read about it in magazines and things, and it had gotten pretty positive write-ups. Hey, look, this is a pretty cool show.
Yeah.
Yeah, our music was playing.
Oh, we're going.
Okay.
Technical glitch that it's all figured out.
It's in the other
It's all right.
thing. So anyway.
No, I think that's a great point. I think moving forward, it definitely will benefit us, everyone, to see more images, more examples of men in various roles. And I agree that, you know, as genders, there may be some biological differences. However, I will say that parenting is, and parents, the idea of parents and parenting is a product of culture. And culture is constantly changing and has changed over the millennia. So I think it's important to kind of put that, you know, to kind of keep that in mind when we create these images of what is a father and what is a mother and what does a family unit look like. And to kind of recognize that there may be some differences, but there also is a great area of flexibility and of movement.
I'd say I hate to disagree, but I love debating.
Yeah.
So I don't hate to disagree. There was a story I heard from the daughter of a very open-minded liberal. I think he was a dean at a college. I'm not sure if he was the dean or if he was just a teacher there, a professor. But either way, his theory was, you know, the gender roles are 100% put on by, you know, the people around you and the media and all these things. So he wanted to prove that they weren't realistic. So he bought his daughter trucks and stuff like that. And she was raised, you know, playing with them and not with dolls. And, you know, he tried to use her as an example, and she stood up and said, "You do realize that I named one of the trucks Mommy, one Dad, and the little one was the baby, right?"
Right.
Which means her natural reaction was to go, "I want dollies, I want mommy, daddy, baby." That's biologically, that was in her. It wasn't from any influence around the house or any media that they allowed her to view. That was what was in her naturally. So the
I don't
idea
think the
that
science is saying that, though, and I'm pretty. I can say with confidence that again, that's a product of the culture. Even
that she wasn't exposed to.
But even the words "mommy" and "daddy" are product. Those are language choices. Those are products of our culture.
Well, she had a mommy and she had a daddy.
Right, and not everyone does.
But I think, you know, coming back to that team aspect of it, right? And even just to get away from the gender and the gender roles.
Yeah.
As our culture has changed and we have more acceptance of same-sex marriages, let's call them marriages or agreements, and same-sex parents. Again, the ideal for a child is to have two parents. Even if there's two same-sex parents, they both bring different things to the table, both same-sex parents. And that ideally, you've got the input from these two individuals as parents that are going to add to the child.
Right, and I'm trying to think of this, the group, the study. I can't come up with it right now, but this issue has been brought up numerous times over the last decade around same-sex couples and marriages, and that was kind of the selling point. It doesn't matter the gender. What matters is that in terms of a family unit, having a pair, a couple, is what create strong family ties.
Right.
So again, though, that is based, the issue of gender is an issue of culture, is an issue. And so if you look at different cultures in different nations, we have very differing opinions and differing constructs in
But
which...
most of the planet, the girls do tend to lean towards the mothering side of things and the emotional side of
Well,
things.
there's-
And the men tend to be the
And we may
hunter-gatherer.
agree to
things.
disagree on that, but...
Well, and when you say the science kind of points to that, that's also predetermined results that they don't look at both sides of it, because there's a lot of science that shows that that's not actually the way it really is. And when any scientific research that's not willing to look at the things that contradict it isn't
Yeah.
real science.
Well, I think, and I think we can look
from
at
either
this-
side, from
Sure,
either side,
sure,
and it
yeah.
drives me nuts because people only want to look at the stuff that proves their points, and it's
That's a fair...
and either side doing
Yeah.
that is wrong.
Right,
I think we
right.
can look at that and we can say, because we can go, I can actually sit here and go either way with this, okay? Because
Yeah.
I can talk about both sides. Oftentimes, Greg and
Right.
I like to have the debates, so
Yeah.
we like to play devil's advocate and
Absolutely.
everything. But I just want to bring it back because there is some area of debate in this.
Yeah.
I mean, there definitely is some area of debate. But to kind of bring back to our culture and talk about the influences that are coming in on our culture and our children. And then, like as Chad is saying, to be media savvy is to be able
Yeah.
to look at some of these things and try to evaluate. We're talking about, in general, talking about, gender roles and how
Yeah.
do we want to examine that. But there's a lot that comes to being media savvy about some of this for our kids.
Right.
And how do we, at one point, as parents, I just touched my mic, but how do we as parents, when is there a tipping point where
Yeah.
we start to lose influence as opposed to the culture and the media? Where do we start to lose a little bit of influence where
Unfortunately,
our
I think it's
children look at
earlier
us
and earlier.
and start
Yeah.
to say, well, it's our parents, and now we're of course looking for safety and we're trying to influence our kids in the best way, where our kids start to go like, whoa, they're not cool anymore.
Right,
Mom and dad
right.
are just, man, they don't understand.
Well, actually, you're right. Like earlier on, our brains are mostly developed by the time we're 5. 80% of our brain is developed by the age of 5, and so all of the experience leading up to the age of 5 really informs kind of how we kind of will be in the world and see the world. And so what we're kind of experiencing, through media and through the experiences in our families really shapes kind of who we are and what we do. So I think kind of the tipping point is, like you were saying, earlier and earlier. And what we have to do, the responsibility that we have and the opportunity that we have is to really be proactive as parents and as dads, to really kind of break down some of those influences and be the positive role models that we can.
Right. I think one of the things, we talked a little bit about sexuality. And how we're still, as a culture, kind of holding a little bit of a line with this.
Yeah.
But I noticed, and I've kind of pointed this out, is that we've become more accepting of violence at an earlier age, exposing our kids to violence before we're willing to expose them to sexuality. Anyway, maybe
Right.
I should
In other countries, it's the opposite too. In Canada, even that's not that far away. The sexuality's less censored, and they keep the kids away from the violent content at an early age. So, I mean, it's definitely, wiser men than myself have said, I'd rather have my kids see someone make love than kill someone.
I've said that.
Well, I heard George Carlin say it, but he
Okay.
said
I
he
thought
said
that
it more
was-
explicitly.
That was like an underhanded compliment to him. That's what I thought that was going.
I'm not going to compliment it. No.
On the show, wow.
We are actually getting to the point where we're running out of time, so we would love to have you come back and talk more, definitely, because
Yeah.
I don't think we've come to any outright conclusions, but I think that we've
Yeah.
brought up a lot of good stuff and got a lot of good information out there, but I'm sure there's plenty more that you can
Yeah,
come
and I
in and share with us at some
encourage
point.
dads and men to kind of explore and go out, as well as women and families to go out and explore and kind of learn a little bit more about what we're seeing in the media. As I say, go to our website, Greater Falls Connections. We have several areas there where you can kind of drill down and look at media literacy. The Center for Media Justice, Media Literacy Project, and Common Sense Media are really great resources. And
while we're putting out things like that, our email address is wegotdaddyissues@yahoo.com. Send us show topics, comments. Would be more than willing to talk about any emails on the show.
Talk about some of the gender stuff that we talked about. Give your opinion on it.
And I think one thing we can all agree on is, women making 70 cents for every dollar a man makes is not fair, because that only leaves the man with 30 cents. Anyway.
Oh, you're going to end on that joke?
I think he's trying to get people to
I want someone to write.
Feedback.
Write to us. Then I won't have to say horrible things.
Let me send a plug out. Okay, I do a dad's group, second and fourth Tuesdays of the month over at Parks Place. We're going to be doing that at Parks Place next Tuesday, the 8th at 6 p.m. If you have some interest, show up 6 p.m. on the 8th. I'll be there. Let's talk about some dad stuff.
All right. Thanks for having me on the show. I really
thanks,
appreciate the opportunity.
And so I guess that's been Daddy Issues for this week. So I've been Craig Jakes. And
I'm Don Tretler.
And wait till your father gets home.